What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of First Date Unsolved. I just want to address that I've had several people reach out and comment that there was like noise distortion in some of my other episodes, specifically the episode with Christopher Dietrich. I just kind of realized it was the crappy headphones I was using. In order to record through the mic and then hear playback through the mic, you need headphones. And I was just using some old like Samsung headphones. So I'm recording today without any headphones until I can get nicer ones. So you spoke, I heard you. Thank you very much for the feedback. I always appreciate it. So hopefully this is better. Hopefully the episodes sound better. There'll be less glitches moving forward. And I do apologize for any past disturbances. I'm pretty sure the episode coming up, or not coming up, it's coming up right now as I'm recording this. It hasn't been released yet, but the chocolate candy murders, the one that's coming out on Halloween, I'm pretty sure there's a point where I say something about Mary Elizabeth and like glitches. It would have been too hard to correct it. So I just left it, and I'm very sorry. I'm not lazy. Okay, I'm not. I just have a lot going on all the time. So time is money, right? But anyway, yes, thank you very much for your feedback. I appreciate it. I'm working on correcting that. But enough of that. Today, we are going to be talking about the disappearance of Anne Denise Victoria Manchester. If you follow any of the other Delaware-based true crime Facebook pages, I would say, like Murder Mystery Delaware, shout out to her. Crime Blogger 1983, he's not Delaware specifically, but he has covered some Delaware cases. He's covered this. I want to say Unsolved has covered this at least once as well. So the story of Anne Manchester is pretty well known, at least to, Delaware true crime community. And we're going to be talking about her today. This episode was very much a collaboration because without the help of one of our listeners, Mr. Jeremy Smith, and all the legwork that he puts in, I would have just had to put Anne in probably like a homage episode. Just, there's not much out there. Tale as old as time around here, right? I try to do the research. I try to give you guys content, meat and potatoes when it comes to these victims, because the more we know, the better. Yeah, it just, in my personal opinion, it increases the odds of these people being found, their killers being caught. It just kind of makes sense in my head. So again, without Jeremy's help, and the help of some of the other people he got involved, poor Anne, wouldn't have had her own episode. So I'm very thankful, very grateful, very happy to present this to you guys today. And let's go ahead and get started. Anne Denise Victoria Manchester was born on June 10th, 1954, to Andrew H. and Joyce A. Manchester. Between the ages of 6 and 12, Anne, her parents, and her brother David lived in Walnut Creek, California. After moving back to Delaware, Anne would attend and graduate from A.I. DuPont High School. There, she was a member of the Future Teachers of America Club. We're going to fast forward a good bit, I would say, into her college years, because 3 days before she was set to receive her master's degree for business administration from the U of D, Manchester went missing. Sunday, June 29th, 1980, was a hot and humid day, and thunderstorms were rolling in. Summer's here in Delaware. We've talked about that a couple times. Anne was briefly visited by one of her guy friends that morning, and he was gone by 12:30 p.m. He is the last known person to see Miss Manchester alive. Less than 2 hours later, a girlfriend called Anne, and the pair discussed some school matters during like a quick call, like a quick catch up. This young lady is the last known person to have spoken to Anne. It wasn't until more than a week later, when Anne's parents returned from a vacation on July 8th, that anyone would even begin looking for Anne. After calls to their daughter went unanswered the entire day, Andrew and Joyce went to her apartment where she lived alone and found that the door was unlocked. Everything was in order inside, but Miss Manchester was gone. It didn't look like there was a struggle, no forced entry of any kind. It just looked like Anne had, kind of picked up and left. Anne's purse with her money were still in the house, her checkbooks, and her cigarettes were all left behind. Her keys to her blue Honda and the blue Honda were still there at the apartment. So, it's very odd circumstances right now. Where is our daughter? Some school books were piled on a table, apparently after like a study session, and a pair of sandals were found under the table, suggesting that the young woman had been barefoot when she disappeared. I don't know if, she had other shoes she could have slipped on. I don't know. But according to investigators, they kind of put it together that she was barefoot. This was just something that I thought of. This is a sidebar really quick. Why didn't the school suspect anything or call for a welfare check, like professors or somebody? I know colleges are big. There's a lot of students. There's a lot of employees. There's a lot that goes on. But she was getting her master's degree in a few days. I can't say for sure if she had taken all of her final exams. I'm not. There's a lot here, right? She had books insinuating she was studying, so maybe she still did have exams. If she didn't show up to those exams, why wasn't that questioned? If it was questioned, why weren't her parents notified? Was anyone notified? Were the police called? If she didn't have exams, was she... All I kept reading was that she was set to get her master's degree within 3 days of her disappearance. I don't know if that's, graduation or what, but it just seems very, very odd to me that someone would put all this work and effort and money, honestly, right? Because college is not cheap. I don't know about back in 1980, but this is something you work hard for, right? You're not just going to ghost the whole process. You're not just going to dip out right before obtaining your master's. It's a big deal. So why was no one alarmed when she just vanished off the face of the earth? But anyway, all of that out of the way, just my thoughts. Let's get back to the case here. So police were called immediately by Anne's parents. And when they searched the Villa Belmont apartment on Welsh Track Road, they found nothing suspicious, just like Mr. and Mrs. Manchester had. At that point, something like 9 days had passed since she was last seen or spoken to, so the clock had already been ticking, and now authorities had really some serious catching up to do. In an attempt to generate leads, a reward was offered in the amount of $1,000, but Mr. and Mrs. Manchester decided that wasn't enough, so they increased the amount up to $5,000 1 week after their original plea for help. $5,000 might not seem like a whole lot for the return of your child, but $5,000 in 1980 equals out to be just under $20,000 today. So that might make more sense in our minds if you're a parent or, just in general. $5,000, that's not a lot. But no, back then it was quite a chunk of change. I have a quote here from law enforcement regarding Anne's disappearance. Quote, "We've spoken to her friends, acquaintances, classmates, and there's no indication of instability. On the contrary," Von Koch said. Neighbors near her third-story apartment said they noticed nothing unusual. Friends said Miss Manchester was a car person, quote, car person, who went everywhere by car, which basically means she wasn't in the habit of jogging, walking, or biking anywhere. She was, if I have my car, I'm going to drive, okay? You won't catch me out here walking around. Von Kutch also said that she had, quote, the usual boyfriends as a college girl has, end quote, but no serious relationships or problems. So, she went on dates, hung out here and there, but no serious relationships and no real serious problems with men in particular. And here is where Jeremy comes into play, because courtesy of him, I have several screenshots from a conversation about this case. The conversation was held in a private group on Facebook, and all of the individuals who were involved in the conversation either worked on the case personally, knew someone who worked the case, so like a husband or family member or friend, or the person's individuals had lived in the same area as Anne at that same exact time. So these are all people not necessarily close to Anne, but close to the investigation. The first interesting aspect of the chat is that police had a person of interest at one point. I don't have many details, obviously, but it is said that Anne had kind of been involved with a married man in one way or another, and we're going to call that man Al. Al lived in the Lancaster area and worked for Lucan's Steel in Coatesville, Pennsylvania. The Coatesville mill is now owned and operated by, ArcelorMittal Steel, and is the oldest and longest continuously operating mill in the country. I've never personally been inside of a steel mill, but I do know that in order to do anything with metal, you need to be able to melt it down in order to mold it and form it into products and make shapes out of it, right? Speculation is that because Al had access to facilities such as the mill, he'd also have a means of disposing of Anne's remains should he need to. I can't speak to how true these rumors are. It's all hearsay. But if you know anything about the Watts family murders, stuff like that does happen. So it's not very far-fetched. To be honest, it's not quite as out there as it may seem. The second most interesting thing I found about the chats was from a woman who lived in the Villa Belmont apartments at the same time as Anne. This woman shared that to enter each of the building's main entrances, you had to have special access, or be buzzed in. Anne lived on the 3rd floor of her building, and this woman lived directly across the courtyard. After Anne vanished, the rumor mill got to work, and it has been speculated, again, speculation, hearsay, that a fellow resident of the apartments could be responsible for Anne's disappearance. Jeez, I can't talk. This person of interest, I guess, we're going to call him Stu. This woman describes Stu as weird and remembers him having a telescope on his balcony or deck. She had a feeling that he was doing more than bird watching or looking at stars with this telescope, and she got creepy stalker / peeping Tom vibes from him. I'm not sure how much police looked into him, if he was looked into at all, but that's just, again, another rumor that started circulating after Anne disappeared out of the blue. Other than what I just read you and what we're about to get into now, I didn't find anywhere where police mentioned suspects, persons of interest. I didn't read anything at all, to be honest. And again, which is kind of, why I'm thanking Jeremy. Thank you, Jeremy, so very much for his help with this case. I stated that the apartment was completely normal, no sign of a fight, no sign of commotion, no sign of Anne. There's really nothing to go off of. And I'm really sorry if you feel like I'm leaving you hanging here, but there's not much. So again, thank you, Jeremy, for sharing those messages. And now we're going to get into a little bit, we're going to get into something that you're probably not expecting. On July 30th, 2024, I spoke with a woman who was a local to the area at the time of Anne's disappearance. She didn't live in the apartments, but she's local to Newark. This woman has what she likes to call clairvoyant abilities. She didn't call herself a psychic, so I'm not going to throw that word out there. But she has these dreams, and in the past, she has seen things that do end up coming true. It may not be right away, but they come true eventually. If you are skeptical of this kind of thing, I totally get it, okay? I do. But I have family members who have had similar experiences, and I totally believe that this is a real gift for some people. This woman has asked me to remain anonymous, so I will not be using her name. I'm going to call her Pat. When it comes to Anne's case, Pat had 2 separate dreams. These dreams happened a very long time ago, because Anne's disappearance happened a very long time ago. But Pat still somehow manages to recall major events that took place in these dreams. What she saw was so vivid and seemed so real at the time that she went to the Newark Police Department and asked to speak with the detective on the case because she was convinced that she had information that could help find Anne. Pat was led to a room with a big table and was asked to sit down. Not an interrogation room, but kind of like a conference room, I would say. She mentioned how intimidating her surroundings were, but she knew she had to speak with someone about what she saw. When she began explaining her reasoning for being at the station, the detective told her that they already had a psychic by the name of Nancy Anderson there to help, and her leads ended up being a dead end. So kind of like saying, thanks, we've already had one cuckoo psychic in here. She didn't help us at all, so we don't need your help. But Pat's attitude was more or less like, look, do you want to hear what I have to say or not? She proceeded to describe in her first dream that she saw Anne with a man. This man whom Anne was involved with was a married man with 2 children. He was an ordinary looking guy with wire-rimmed glasses, and nothing else really about him stood out. He was just an average Joe who lived in New Jersey. When Pat described the gentleman from her dream, the detective stood straight up and exclaimed, I knew it was him. Like he pointed, he felt it. He's like, I knew it was him. Mind you, Pat didn't know this guy's name, didn't know anyone was ever considered a suspect or a person of interest in the case. She knew next to nothing about any of this because there had been no updates or any information released to the public. She's just going off of what she saw in her sleep. The second part of Pat's dream came to her several months after the first. In this dream, she was standing in a wooded area with a fence in front of her. On the other side of the fence is a parking lot to the Chrysler plant in Newark. She knows that it's the Chrysler plant because she had worked there at one point and knew the area very well. In the parking lot was a pile of dirt. Behind her was a running creek, and she said she could smell that decomposition smell. The odor was so strong and so real in her dream, obviously, that it led her to believe that this was the area where Anne's body was, and due to the strength of the stench, Anne had been there dead for at least 3 days. Pat did explain that there were other aspects of the dream which wouldn't have made much sense to you guys or I, so she didn't really get into those. But she did let me know that she thought the pile of dirt in the parking lot was like a symbol for Anne's body being buried under a pile of dirt somewhere in that wooded area. Not necessarily saying that her body was under the pile of dirt in the parking lot, but again, like a symbol that that poor girl's body was buried in those woods somewhere under a pile of dirt. I hope that makes sense. These dreams came to Pat roughly 6 months to a year after Anne went missing. And, she wasn't sure at all if this information was useful, but just though the feelings it gave her, how vivid everything was, she knew she needed to provide her information to police. So that's what she did. And after that, she left, went on her way. Some years later, after getting married and having children, Pat and her family went to Rittenhouse Park in Newark. It had been a long time since she had even thought of Anne at this point, so she was extremely surprised when she walked through the park and all of a sudden she just froze. It was like deja vu to her because everything around her looked just like it had in one of the dreams she had about Anne all those years prior. She's walking through the park with her husband, her children. Just all of a sudden, like just something hits her. And she's like, wow, I've been here before, right? If you've had deja vu, you know it's kind of trippy. And she remembers her husband like looking at her like, what are you doing? Let's go. And she's like, no, this is it. I've been here. I know what this is. This is where Anne is. Her husband, not knowing what the heck she's talking about, just carries on. But it felt very, very familiar. It felt very eerie. And just, all those, mid 80s, late 80s, she still remembers that feeling to this day, like how hard it struck her, like lightning almost. During our call, Pat expressed that she was incredibly disappointed with how Anne's case was handled as far as law enforcement is concerned. Once again, we've all seen shows and movies, true crime, not true crime, fiction, whatever, but we all have this certain level of expectation as to the kind of effort that's supposed to be put forth in a case. Sadly, this is real life, and law enforcement doesn't have, this big movie budget. So processes and procedures that Pat felt should have been conducted, at least at the minimum, were kind of skipped over. I did find a Nancy Anderson online who I believed was involved with assisting police in Newark, and I did send her a message. Sadly, she was not the Nancy Anderson who helped out Newark PD. I do imagine that Nancy Anderson is a common name, but I wouldn't have guessed that there were more than one psychic Nancy Anderson. I was wrong. But yes, the young lady I spoke to let me know that, no, not me, sorry. She thinks the other Nancy Anderson has passed, so it's not likely for me to contact her. But either way, that individual, according to police, wasn't much help, at least to their investigation. So it wouldn't make much difference if I talked to her anyway. I do need to mention really quick that what Anne was wearing before she went missing. At the time of her disappearance, Anne was wearing denim cutoff jeans and a t-shirt. She was 5'2" and 115 pounds with brown hair, brown eyes, and a medium complexion. So she kind of had a tan going on. It's summer, dark hair, dark eyes, tan skin. I will share images of her, any images I'm able to find, of course. You can all take a look at that over on social media. And, to wrap this up, it does hurt me to say this, but the odds of Anne ever being recovered aren't promising. There are too many theories and not enough solid evidence that sticks. Without a confession from the guilty party, we may never really learn what happened to Anne Manchester. It's always hard for me to see these young people have their future stolen from them. Every victim that we've discussed here has been robbed, and it's not fair. Old or young, it's not fair, but it's, incredibly hard to see like these faces smiling when I'm looking through cases, trying to pick one to work on. I swear, you see so many smiles, and these people just look so happy at that stage in their life. But then you come back to reality, and it's like, well, they're no longer here. And it's awful. It's a gut-wrenching feeling. It's terrible. But of course, obviously, as always, if you know anything about Anne Manchester's disappearance, if you have any details you think could help, even in 2024, 2025, 2026, whenever you come across this episode, if you have any information at all, I always suggest reaching out to Delaware Crime Stoppers. You can report any information anonymously. They have a website. They have a phone number. Sorry, I don't have it written down in my script, but you can Google it. You can call them up or send an email, send a message, say, hey, I know this information, hope it helps. And that's it. You don't have to give your name. You don't have to give anything. Just if you know something, please say something. And with that being said, everyone, if you thought nothing ever happened here in Delaware, you thought wrong.